All right, I did the on button. Thanks, fellas. These guys are the best. Pretty exciting to hear about all these bar and bat mitzvahs and just the growth that's happening in individuals, and so wonderful to have that happening. Kind of makes you really feel grateful when you think about, there was a season when we couldn't even meet here, right? And now here we are getting back to, I'm not going to say normal. We're getting back to being blessed. We're getting back to taking back the land, taking back our freedoms. So a couple weeks ago, the gentlemen met at a farm in Kentucky. We got to hear 3 great speakers. Weather didn't cooperate with everything we wanted to do, but got some of the recreation into, and certainly a lot of the fellowship and a lot of encouragement. And, we hit some themes that everybody needed to hear to get recharged and energized for our families and our communities and the things that we do, our roles. Randy Ballard was up first, and he talked about putting on the whole armor of God. The passage is found in Ephesians 10 through 20. Verse 13 specifically, it says, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, stand. So, God calls us into battle sometimes, and we end up in fights, maybe not of our own choosing, but we're in those circumstances, and if there's no back door, you just got to take it. You just got to jump in and deal with the circumstances that life deals that are dealt to you. If you've ever known anybody who had a terminal illness or disease, and you're in relationship with that person, or you're in contact with that person in their last days, that experience can bring out the deepest emotion in anybody, in all of us, on both sides. Those who have resolved their personal issues can be very peaceful and loving, and it can be a sweet, tender time. Those who have unresolved issues can become bitter, angry, resentful. And if you're on the receiving end of that bitterness and that anger and that resentment, sometimes you just have to withstand, the not the literal, but the figurative fiery darts. Get yelled at, get screamed at, feel the brunt of the anger and the resentment and the bitterness of the individual. And that's the most intense experience of that kind. But even on a lighter note, in everyday world, when I was a restaurant manager, I'd go to a table and somebody had a steak that was undercooked. And a lot of times when the tone and the facial expressions of the individual were real evident, I wanted to start the sentence by saying something like, "I'm sorry, I didn't kill your brother." But people can be so angry. And then in my job, in that role, all I could do is just listen to the anger. Let them exhaust and vent all of that, and then resolve the issue. But that's how it is in a lot of circumstances in life. The insults, the anger, the resentment that we have to hear sometimes, it's not necessarily personal, but it does come out. And it's not always literal. Like, Randy gave us that example of the Native Americans defending their ground and being surrounded by their opponents, and then using those literal fiery darts, the literal fiery arrows to defend themselves. Proverbs 27:6 reminds us that people who are close to us can be both friend and foe, and sometimes even in the same conversation. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. All of us have had relationships and interactions with people that can start out friendly and become difficult, or start out difficult and become friendly. And That's the way the enemy operates in our lives. The enemy operates in our lives in relationship, very often in relationship, sometimes with strangers or interactions, I guess you'd say in that case, and sometimes with people we know and we've loved or who have loved us for years. And sometimes we just need to do what we can to hold our ground and wait for God to do the rest. Sometimes we have to, we've presented our message. We've presented, for example, a salvation or an evangelistic message or a message of reconciliation or making amends with somebody. And when we do everything we can, the next step is for us to wait for God to work in their heart, work in their lives of those people, and see if they come back to us, see if we can resolve issues or stay in relationship. Sometimes we get so focused on staying in relationship, though, with extended family, friends, coworkers, and neighbors, that we do more than we should to maintain those relationships. That's why business is booming for people like Eric Cavey. Eric's in the mental health field, and there are a lot of people in need all around us in every strata of life. Many of us need to learn how to set good boundaries in our relationships. We need to learn when to say no, when to say yes, and when to say those things emphatically. When to walk away. Walk away is a coping skill that we teach to people in the addicted population. Sometimes in a moment of weakness, they have that interaction where they can fall into relapse. And you can't win an argument with the dope dealer. You can't win an argument with your old friend who's trying to bring you back into an old way of life. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to walk away. And I know I'm talking about addicted people, but in any interaction, in any relationship, sometimes the right thing to do is just to walk away and let them keep their anger, let them keep their resentment, let them keep their bitterness. Let them own it. If you've done everything you can, then you've done everything you can. I have watched the Lord, or his messenger, like Deb, my wife, help me solve problems that looked like mountains with a simple word or two like, that's not your problem, or stop worrying, or my favorite still, God is still in control. Many of us put too much energy into questions such as, how can I get others to believe me, or accept my God, or trust the same God that I trust? I realize that we've all heard these messages before, but I know that in my experience as a student, sometimes I need to hear the same message more than once. There have been times in my experience as a student that I had to go to class or, go after class to the professor's office because I needed to hear the message one more time just to pass the class. And hear it a different way sometimes. Sometimes you just need to hear something a different way, or read it a different way, or think it through a different way. At the retreat, we heard themes like, beware of our adversaries' deceptions. Deception comes in a lot of different forms. It's not just lying. Lying is not the only form of deception that's out there. Manipulation. How many of us have been manipulated into buying something that we regretted buying? How many of us have been manipulated into doing something we regretted doing? Never mind. But I was going to say, how many of us have done that to others? But those days, I repented of those days a long time ago. Repeating lies. So there is a matter of telling a lie, and then there's a matter of repeating a lie. If somebody starts gossip and we start to spread it to the wrong person, we're guilty of believing lies, and if we're careful, we can be guilty of spreading those lies. I've said this before, but one of my favorite scriptures is from Matthew 24:4. And Yeshua said, take heed that no one deceives you. Take heed that no one deceives you. He's on the mountain, and the disciples ask him, what are we going to do to get ready for the end times? And he said, Take heed that no one deceives you. And that's every day. Watch out for lies. Watch out for people who want to deceive you. And I don't mean just people. It's the whispers of the enemy, too, that come, the suggestions, the ideas that come into our self-talk, if you will. Some lies have been repeated for generations. My father believed lies that his father told him, that his father told him, that his father told him, going back 4 or 5 generations. And that's true in every family I know, that there is a concept like generational sin, generational lies, and it can be institutionalized too. In drug addiction, there are lies that addicted people hear all the time. Everybody's doing it. This will make you feel better. Or the worst one still, for someone who is still addicted, you'll die if you don't stop. The truth is, and I deal with this a lot, a person who is eager or anxious to go back into their addiction is telling themselves that they'll die if they don't get a drug. And the truth is, it's not going to kill them. It's hard, it's hard in those moments to pray with them and watch them sweat bullets and watch them cry and hold them sometimes. We do all that. We're a faith-based place. We're allowed to do that and pray with them. And I know that's true about all of us. We all get deceived and we all end up in situations where someone's trying to manipulate us into doing the wrong thing and doing things that aren't good for us and for them and for others. Sometimes people hide the truth from us and from themselves. Adults who are addicted have to hide their behavior from their children and grandchildren. The population I work with, and again, I apologize for sticking with addiction, because I know that that's not an issue for most of us, but most of us here, but I'm pretty sure most of us know somebody for whom that is an issue. I would say most of us do, or have known. And some lies come in the form of suggestions or solutions to problems. Not all relationship or life problems are related to drug use or even to other addictions like gambling. How many of us know that Satan can use just about any person or relationship to confuse and manipulate and steal from us? Some of the heroes we read about in Scripture walk closely with God. People like Adam, Abraham, and Enoch are just examples. And walking closely with God is probably the safest way to deal with the enemy. Walking closely with God is the safest way to deal with the enemy. In my experience, in my opinion. If you grew up in a rough neighborhood, or even if you did not, you understand the value of having a big brother in your circle. Although having big brothers didn't seem to help King David as much as his trusting relationship with the Lord. And here's the best part of facing the enemy. Romans 8:31 says, "What shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" It's like being in the boxing ring with a good trainer watching you and watching your opponent. And when you get back to your corner, you get coached on what to do in the next round. Or having a sideline coach in any sport who's been studying the opposing team. That individual will help you know God is like that coach. He knows what your enemy's doing. He knows what your friends are doing. He knows how to join you together, bring you together in unity to fight your foes. Sometimes fighting a foe with a friend is the best way to go. We only need to do what we know how to do and leave the rest up to the Lord. There are weapons involved in our warfare. But it says in Scripture, Isaiah 54:17, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, says the Lord." 2 Corinthians 10:4. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds. I can give you a list of my favorite weapons, but Tom Schiffer can tell you, if you want to be proficient with a weapon, you need to practice, and you need to pay attention to the training. The weapons of our warfare as believers are counterintuitive. Ephesians 4:31. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That's another lesson I learned in restaurant management. Dealing with an angry, loud guest, I just had to maintain my composure and deal with angry, loud guests. Proverbs 16:24. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones. So all these things don't look like defense weapons, but they are. They're ways to deal with people who are coming at you with everything they got, or coming at you with anger and with insult and with what they might hope to be humiliation or any kind of offense. So the last thing I want to talk about today is my favorite weapon, forgiveness. It is a weapon against the enemy, and it works. Some of you who have known me for a long time know that I suffered from migraines for 26 years. 26 years, I had to carry 2 kinds of medication. And if I left the house without my medication, then I got into things like panic attacks and worry. And in these last several years, I had to take those medications most days. 26 years. At the onset, when they really hit me, and I was in a very stressful time in my life, although what should have been a very joyful time as a young dad, and it was a joyful time. It was that mixed emotion time of stress and joy. But at the onset, there were neurologists and doctors who'd say things like, there's nothing physiologically wrong with you after thousands of dollars of tests and lots of time in offices. I was very fortunate when that first hit me, again, 26 years ago, and I want to keep emphasizing that because there's going to be a point I get to here in a little bit about forgiveness. But I was very fortunate. Deb took me to an emergency room that she had worked in, and the doctor who saw me that night was somebody I'd had dinner with in a steakhouse, and the nurse was asking me questions. So keep in mind, the doctor who's going to care for me is a guy, he's got a law degree, and he's an ER doc who's probably seen everything that ER docs see. And he was the chief of that group. In other words, he staffed emergency rooms for a living, and other doctors worked for him on his payroll. He was the CEO. So I'm in a nurse's office, and the nurse is just going through this routine with me, and she says something like, how often do you stutter? And this doctor with these degrees and all this experience, is usually very calm and good with patients, sticks his head in the window and he screams. And he said, this guy doesn't stutter. Get the stroke team in here now. And I panicked. To hear a guy like that lose his composure scared me. But in the end, lots of treatment, and they got medication for me, and I was able to live my life. But I go back to, for 26 years, I suffered with that. And so last December, after, I've been retired from restaurant management, I've been working in the addiction field. And last December, at my kitchen table, or at my breakfast table, the Lord had shown me something, and my dear wife listened to me, and I forgave some people for some things. And one day at a time, I forgave, again, because I don't want to draw attention to the individuals I was forgiving. But what I did was I uttered prayers of forgiveness, and I was able to eat foods that I had not eaten in 26 years. There were something like a dozen foods, or not a dozen, maybe a half a dozen foods. And every morning that week, I'd try a different food. And when I didn't get sick and when I didn't get a migraine, I just praised the Lord. I was just so full of joy that I was able to eat these foods again. And all because I forgave. I'm not going to say that if you run out and forgive everybody for everything, you're going to get healed of every issue you've got, or even your worst issues. I'm telling you what happened to me. I've had 7 months where I didn't have that migraine, where I was carrying medication every day of my life, every day of that 26 years anyway, every day. And to be free from that has been so wonderful. I don't have the fear of, oh my gosh, am I going to, because some of my migraines were caused by some of it was caused by eating the wrong food. Some of it was caused by a stress trigger. And yet I still get headaches. Don't get me wrong. There's some types of headaches, but that migraine, the type that makes me stutter, the type that scares my kids that used to scare my children, just used to scare them. And, to watch their dad suffer like that. And I know I'm sure all of us have had illnesses, disease, things that beset us. And I'm not saying that this is the cure-all, but I am saying forgiveness is a powerful tool against the enemy. An enemy that tried to debilitate me day in and day out has been defeated, has been conquered. I've had 7 months now of no migraines. So what I want to do now is that I want to teach all of you the prayer that I prayed that got me to that place. And I will say that this is something I actually learned this prayer years and years ago. It took me that long to get ready. It took me that long to be able to forgive somebody. So here's an example I can use. How many of you have had a job and you're like, oh, I hate this job. This is, I've got difficulties here. But then you get a raise and you're like, okay, I can do this. I'll do this again. I can get over what the boss did. I can get over the hours. I can get over, it's like that. Some things are easier to forgive than others. And sometimes, people do their part to help make it easier. But the prayer that I prayed, and again, this is how I want to end. Well, yeah, this is how I want to end. I would say, I forgive whoever, whatever, whoever is usually the case, whoever, for, again, I hate to present it as a formula, but it's what works for me, and I just got to say that. It's how I've gotten to 7 months of no migraines. I forgive so-and-so, whoever, in Yeshua's name, for whatever they did, or whatever the offense was. I've had to forgive groups of people, families. I've had to forgive work groups. I've had to forgive institutions, people who are leaders in institutions. I've had to forgive. I've gone back days, years. And all I can say is, keep forgiving until it stops hurting. Keep forgiving until it stops hurting. That's my message. And and you can pray it for yourself and for others. Michael Wolff is a person he came here, and a lot of us don't. Some of us know the people who've known him for years. Elisa, my wife, others. There's some, and I can't name all of you, but there's so many who know that. Man, did he get persecuted by the Jewish community. And I think all of us have had to answer those questions. I've been in situations where people say, well, why don't you call yourself a Christian then? Or the Jews or the Christians who say, well, why don't you call yourself a Jew then? Well, I do, but that's, I mean, it's all of us have some forgiving to do, and I want to urge all of us to do that. And I want to urge it in the most loving, sensitive, gentle way possible, because that's how our God is. I'm not telling you or commanding you. I don't have that authority. But I would urge you, because who knows what can happen in your life? I haven't spent money on scans, medications this year. It's been pretty nice. So thanks for listening to me today.